Hello.
And I am Orna Ross. Hello, everybody. Great to have you here this evening with us for the Alliance of Independent Authors Beginners Self-Publishing Salon. And this week we're going to be talking about beta readers. We had a conversation before we came on about whether it was going to be beta or beta. So American cousins, please forgive us. We say beta on this side of the water. So we'd probably say that most of the time, though. Tim did say he might say beta every so often just to, be
even
sort of all global. Yeah. So what is a beta reader is something we're going to be talking about, why you might consider having one or more of them, and how to actually ensure that you use that reader, which is an invaluable resource. You're asking somebody to do something that's really, really valuable to you and to give up quite a bit of their time and energy. How to make sure that you're getting the best value from their work for you and that you receive the advice in the best possible way so that your book benefits to the greatest possible advantage. So, Tim, do you want to explain what we're talking about? What's the difference between a beta reader and an editor, or your critique group, or your best friend?
Well, normally a beta reader is somebody who gets the book after the editing process, or sometimes before. I mean, it's a bit vague, but it's not designed for somebody to do editing of the book. So it's not really somebody who's designed for proofreading or for general construction or structure. Some people do kind of use beta readers as an extra stage because people will inevitably find mistakes, but it's mainly for people who understand the genre, ideally, and or people to see people's reaction to the actual book. That's the main thing. So if people don't understand, say, like you've written some complicated time travel book and nobody understands it at all, then that's maybe a signal that you maybe need rewrites or other things in terms of it. Also, a lot of authors use beta testers and, of course, street teams as people to be available for writing reviews of the book as soon as the book's out. So it's kind of like a process between the final edit and when the book's actually officially released, where you have a group of people who are beta testers, or beta readers, going from the old IT thing there, who are going to check out your book or your product, and hopefully they'll all love it, and then they'll be available to go and write reviews straight away. So there's a whole number of reasons why people use beta readers, but it's not really a replacement for editing per se.
I think that's the most important point to make, that the beta reader does not replace the editor. And as Tim says there, they can happen either side of the editing process. Classic beta reader is, I think, when most people think about it, they're thinking about you finish the manuscript, you can't do another thing with it, you're sick to the back teeth of it, you never want to see it again, you're not actually capable of improving anything at this stage, but actually it probably would benefit from some feedback, and so bringing people in at that point, pre the actual official, as it were, editing stage, and then later on, after the editing stage, it's a different thing. This is more about people who read it and spread the word. So we'll be talking more, I think, about the first kind of beta reader today, because I think these are people who can it's a really, really useful thing to do with your book, and particularly your first book at the beginning. It's really, really, it's highly recommended that you would include this stage, because to be honest, when you're learning to write, and particularly to write fiction or poetry, but non-fiction too, you need all the help you can get. So you make great progress. It's a learning by doing experience. You've gone through everything you've gone through in terms of writing it, and you will have learned a huge amount about writing in the process, but you get lost. Long form, for the first time especially, just manipulating a lot of words, a lot of text is challenging, and we get lost. There's loads of things we don't know about our manuscript that a beta reader can kind of see. So I think one of the most important things is to frame good questions for your beta reader. So could we just talk a little bit about the kinds of questions that you could ask under the three, the three divisions of writing, if you like, the fiction, poetry, and non-fiction. So do you use beta readers yourself, Tim?
I did for my first book, and I haven't used them since.
Okay.
So
how did it go?
Yeah, it went okay. I mean, the trouble is I provided them like with questions, I think, at the time, but I think everybody ignored them and just told me what anyway. I mean, in some ways, it's one of these chicken and egg things. You ideally would want people who are fans of your genre to read whatever book it is. So if you're writing science fiction, then you want science fiction fans to read it, because there are genres and tropes and things about specific things. So if you just get any old body, and I basically got any old body, really, a few people who were like English teachers I knew to basically read it through. And that's the whole editing versus beta reading thing, where really what you want, if you've got a series of books, fans of the first book are people you want beta reading the second book, ideally. So
yeah, that's really interesting. So it's like pretty much every part of this process that you get better at it as you go along. So the first time you used a beta reader, it probably won't be the best experience, but then you build on that so that the next time you kind of do better. So I think it's really important that the questions you ask are not vague and open-ended. So rather than, this isn't about getting their opinion of whether your book is good or bad. Forget about that question. You will want them to tell you that it's great, and they will want to be able to say that it's great, but actually all of that's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. That's not what you're looking for here. You're looking for stuff that's much, much more specific. So let's take fiction to start. And by the way, if any of you have any questions, if you've ever worked as a beta reader for another writer, if you've ever used a beta reader yourself, we'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments, or indeed if you have specific questions about how to use this service and how to make sure it goes well for you, please do ask your questions in the comments. So yeah, speaking of questions, I think let's take fiction. I think first of all, the first question Tim kind of referred to earlier there, you need to ask, was there any point of the book that was confusing to you? Where did the book confuse you? But not just did it confuse you, at what point in the book did you actually start to feel confused? I think that's really important to kind of get out of the way, first of all. The character you're going to want to explore and see if your character, your MC, your main character, had the effect on the reader that you were trying to make him or her have on the reader. So you need to ask questions around that very specifically, where you try to draw out what they thought without telling them what you wanted them to think. So, that kind of gently probing question, I think, is really important. What do you think on fiction? Let's look at fiction first. We talk about the others in a minute.
Well, I think also, depending on how you presented the book, actually asking what genre that people think the book is in might be a good question, because often the time authors misclassify because you don't necessarily know that it's, especially with the subgenres. I mean, obviously, if you've written a cyberpunk book and you're doing it as kind of dragon fantasy or something, then there's something quite wrong there. But and also, I mean, again, it depends on who you're asking to be as beta readers. But the question is, did you actually finish the book? Because some people won't. And if it's like, well, why didn't you finish the book? Was that because you got bored in a particular section? Did you skip any sections of the book? Did you find any parts of the book repetitive? So yeah, it's about the nature of the actual story in terms of how somebody who is a fan of that genre ideally would come back to you.
Definitely. And if they did fall off, at what point did they fall off? It's interesting that a number of the ebook services now are able to say where a reader stopped reading in a book.
Yeah.
And that's really fabulously interesting information that if only we could get it as authors, it would really help us, I think, to see where our readers get bored or confused or, you know, just give up on us. I think staying with fiction for a moment, and we have Brian is particularly interested in nonfiction, and don't worry, Brian, we will get to nonfiction, but just staying with fiction for the moment, I think it's really important that you ask questions about all the classic elements of fiction, even those that you may not have particularly majored on. So you should have questions about setting. You should have questions, obviously, about the characters and characterization. You should have questions about the plot. You should have questions about the theme. What did they think the theme was? You know, so all of the, you should have questions about the dialogue. You know, did the dialogue feel realistic to you? How would you describe the dialogue? You know, can you give examples of where it worked well? What did you like least about the book? What did you like most? You know, very specific questions. So those two questions I think should apply whether we're talking poetry, fiction or nonfiction. I think you should always ask those two questions, or even what were the top 3 things you liked about the book. But you learn far more from the other questions. What are the 3 things you liked least about the book? So you know, you want to encourage them to give you constructive criticism, but critical feedback. You don't have to accept every bit that you get, but you have to kind of actively try and get that from people, because people are reluctant to tell an author what they really think about a book. Sometimes because they don't want to do the hard work of working it out, or they're not really quite sure. But often too, because they don't want to hurt your feelings. So you've got to make it really clear to them that your feelings won't be hurt, or, you know, even if they will, you can go and kick the cat or whatever, or scream out a window. But don't respond to them in that way.
We're not advocating cat cruelty here, so.
No, of course not. Metaphorical cats.
Yes.
Yeah. Anything else on fiction?
Well, I was going to make a counterpoint, because many years ago, in a university far away, I did a statistics course about survey methods, and something to be aware of is if you ask too many questions, then you're likely to get not as great answers towards the end of the question thing. So it's obviously a balance, because there are important questions for every book and every genre, but you don't want to be giving people like a 24-page survey question sheet, because page 23 will probably be like, even if it's multiple choice, just be A. So there has to be a balance, really.
I think that's a really, really good point. And I think that leads on to understanding that it takes a while, you know, it's going to take a bit of your time to get the most you can out of this beta reading experience. You need to work out which are the questions that are most important to you.
Put them at the top.
Sorry?
Put them at the top of whatever list of questions. Yeah,
exactly. Put them at the top. Also making clear to your reader that they don't have to answer every question that you get.
Yeah.
Tina here is saying that she used a group of beta readers for her first book, which was a memoir, but she actually found that they were hesitant to provide honest feedback due to the subject matter particularly. And I can understand why that would be particularly difficult with memoir. In a sense, you've got to create a process that extracts that honesty in some way. And I do think that's about asking very specific questions. It's also about preparing yourself psychologically for the responses, you know, setting yourself up to actually genuinely be able to take criticism. It's not easy, and especially at first. I think on your first book, I think by the time you've written a few books, it's much easier. But that first book really is a baby. And, you know, I've said before, we're all a bit kind of crazy. You know, postnatal mania sets in after we've produced a manuscript. And we can be very, very emotional and very, very tender. And that's not the thing to bring into the beta reading process. You know, you as an author, you're preparing for a lifelong experience of people, of inviting people to critique you, be that your beta reader, your editor, and then your reviewer, and your family and friends won't like the book, and you know, so many other people. And in part of our job is learning how to toughen up around that stuff and how to be resilient, able to listen to constructive criticism, take on board what's being said without it necessarily agreeing with everything. So it's a bit of a skill, a bit of a practice, and definitely if you know you're touchy, if you know that you're likely to be prickly in response, doing the work in advance to ensure that you don't, that you don't respond in a way that where somebody has gone out of their way to give you feedback and read your book, which is a heck of a thing for somebody to do for you, that you appreciate that regardless of what they come back with.
Yeah. How long a time would you reckon people should give beta readers to read the book? Because, I mean, obviously it's dependent on how long the book is, but what is a reasonable time to read, say, 100,000 word novel or 50,000 word non-fiction book or something along those lines?
It's a great question, because you've got this balance of, you want them to kind of read it and respond when the material is warm. So you don't want to give them too long, because they can actually, you know, put off reading it, or else read it and not write up the report, or, you know, kind of forget about it then, and blah, blah, blah. So you want to give a reasonable amount of time, but you don't want to give too much time. So I think, you know, you're looking at something like 3 to 4 weeks, I think, is a reasonable amount of time for a book of that length. If it's shorter, a bit shorter. I don't think you could ask somebody to read and respond in less than 2.5 weeks, you know, 2.5 weeks. Even on a short book, I think, you know, respecting their time. So you have to also time it into your process, knowing that it's going to have to go from them to an editor and then on to a, you know, everything else that has to happen. So, you know, don't rush this is I think the most important thing. Make sure that you have, if you're going to do it, that you've built in proper amount of time, not just for them to read it and respond to you, but for you to then integrate what they've said and do that pass through the manuscript. And depending on the level of their responses, you may need to do a few passes through. I think it's very useful when you're passing through a manuscript to go through for different aspects of the book on each pass, rather than trying to do everything all together. Specifically then, non-fiction, would you think there are differences, Tim, in terms of what we look for as non-fiction readers?
Yes, I would guess so. I'm struggling to think of exactly what at the moment, but I'm hoping you'll enlighten me about what, because clearly, like, fiction and non-fiction are kind of different, and also non-fiction varies vastly by genre. I mean, sort of memoirs one thing, and a how-to book is quite another thing.
Absolutely. I mean, your memoir, literary non-fiction, if you like, which is more like fiction, up at that end of the scale, and then down to very nuts and bolts kind of practicals. But I do think one of the differences between fiction and non-fiction is that the most important thing, far and away more important than writing style or anything else, is that the book has the value that the reader, you know, bought it for. With non-fiction. So with fiction and with literary non-fiction, you're essentially selling a feeling, a feeling response. You're entertaining or amusing or making sad, but essentially they're going to walk away from your book with sort of imaginative responses and feeling responses. With nonfiction, the bulk of nonfiction, the 95% of nonfiction, which is about kind of how to do something or why you would do something or what's wrong with something, the main thing is that there will be a sort of a question in the promise of the book. The book will be promising to answer a question or a problem. It will actually be presenting value to the reader. And the main thing that you're looking for is that they got their value, that they got the answer they went looking for when they picked up your book, and that it proceeds logically from start to finish. We have an interesting comment here from Carl. I freely shared draft material for my nonfiction book with a range of beta readers because I wanted to gauge how a range of readers would respond. My material is about finance, economics, and philosophy. So nice light stuff there, Carl. More specifically, about an idea for a performance-based capital structure for venture stage initial IPOs, initial public offerings. So very specific, and as Carl says, a topic that is unfamiliar to many, but hugely relevant, obviously, particularly at the moment, and with philosophical dimension, which is sorely needed in that arena. Yet I wanted to reach those who were new to the subject, so getting feedback from a diverse group was valuable. So you did find it valuable, Carl. It'd be really good to hear from you if you have, if you could kind of fill us in. Steve, second year ally member here. Hi, Steve. That's great. Glad you wanted to hang around for a second year. That's wonderful. I'm published, working on my next book. I tried some beta readers from Goodreads beta reader group and was very disappointed. By and large, the beta readers were young, inexperienced, and not versed in the classics. I'm 60 years old and was weaned on Asimov, Bradbury, Clark, and King. In the section I submitted for the beta read, there was a classic Shakespearean reference, such as Et tu, Brute? And the beta reader replied, I don't get it. This doesn't make any sense. All I could do was hang my head, which leads me to my question. Are beta readers or critique partners available through AskALLi? Okay, so there's a couple of things in here. This kind of plays to your point, Tim, of making sure that you get the right people, the right beta readers. Are beta readers or critique partners available through AskALLi? Well, you can definitely put out a call in the forum and explaining, what your book is like and some of the things that you said there, which would make it very clear where your book is coming from. And I think you would find amenable beta readers in the group for sure. But we also have a very interesting partner member called Scribophile, and that is actually a beta reader service. So you tell them about your book and they match you to beta readers who are right for the book. Because, that kind of experience that you have there is really, it's just useless. It's kind of a waste of everybody's time if it's the wrong people. Do you have any thoughts on that one, Tim?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's ideally you want people to understand the book. But then again, it does come back to if you've got a book which is how to fish, then that could be more general kind of beta reader as opposed to sort of Shakespeare's best plays or something. And then you don't want a load of people who've never read any Shakespeare reading it. So a lot depends on the book. But you do need, because otherwise it's kind of pointless really, because you might as well just find 10 people off the street and give them a book if you're going to do that.
Interesting here, Jack A. Ori. I'm a member of Scribophile, which is great. Love to hear more, Jack. He says it's a bit different than using beta readers for your whole manuscript, but it's a good way to get some practice with giving and getting feedback. So would love more feedback from you, Jack, about exactly what happened there with Scribophile. It was my understanding that they were a beta reader service. So obviously there are some distinctions there, which I'd maybe be able to fill us in on that. But he does recommend the service and he hopes to use beta readers for his entire manuscript when it's ready. So good luck with that. Brian is working on the second edition of a 4-year-old non-fiction book. I used some beta readers for the first edition. I will go back to that audience for the second edition, but was seriously considering using social media groups I belong to and contribute to around the subject matter, which is building, design and construction, and asking there for beta readers. Now, Tim, you've done a really good book on social media. Brian is asking, any experience with using social media carefully, obviously, in a pointed way to get beta readers? Is that something you came across when you were researching your own book?
Well, not specifically for beta readers, but actually, beta readers are exactly sort of, it's going into Facebook groups, Twitter chats, like we're going to have one in a minute, hopefully. that are specifically for your book's subject matter. You do have to appreciate that people in those groups may not be people. You want people who are subject matter experts and people who can read quickly, because there may be people who say like, oh yeah, I'll read your book, and then when they actually 2 months later they've not read it. So yeah, but social media is a fantastic way to find people. Twitter especially, because Twitter's totally open, so you can see everybody on the network. Where Facebook and LinkedIn and other networks, you have to go to groups to find people. So yeah, communities on social media are a great place to find beta readers, or any connections really, to be fair, and reviewers as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a great idea, Brian. I really would think it's a good idea. And I think Twitter lists could be used very effectively over time as you're writing and researching a book, to actually build up people who have the interest, so that when you've got the book put together, you would have a list of experts in the area who also seem to be bookish. And because you're really looking for three things: they got to know what you're talking about, and be an expert either in the genre or the subject matter if it's nonfiction, and or genre indeed, because nonfiction breaks down into lots of different genres itself. They've got to be good readers. They've got to be people who understand books and have read a lot, and know what a good book looks like, feels like, and the difference between a good where a book begins to fall down. And then they have to be good at giving, at expressing those parts of what doesn't work for them, what does work for them, able to identify it and be quite articulate about it. So I would finish again by just saying you are asking a lot of these people, and to be cognizant of that, and to, if you are going to go into this process, to realize that it is important, and it's a process that's going to take time from you, and it's going to take emotional energy from you, and to bring all of that with it. Do you have any kind of closing thoughts?
Would you suggest people paying and compensating the beta readers? Obviously they give them a free copy of the book, but
yeah, obviously they get a free copy of the book when the book comes out. I don't know about actual payment, though certainly it's something you could do. I think that's more like paying for a manuscript evaluation from an expert, either a literary consultancy or an editor, rather than what we think of as beta reading. But it's kind of the same thing. I mean, if money changes hands, they've got more of an obligation to you. And you may be choosing to do that because they have more expertise. It's certainly something you can do. And formal manuscript evaluations are very useful, I think, for beginner writers in particular. You can learn an awful lot more from that process, I think, than from taking a course. So it's optional, but I think our classic sort of beta reader situation, they do it for the love of it. You appreciate it, and I definitely think a gift is called for at the end of the process, if not money. So we're going to continue this chat, folks, over on Twitter. We're going to have a Twitter chat now. So if any of you are tweeters, it will be great to have you on the the ALLi Twitter account, which is at Indie Author Ally. The two of us will be there till about 8 o'clock. So if you've got specific questions about your own situation or anything like that, please do follow us on over onto Twitter. If not, we'll see you here in about a month's time, where we will be moving on to the editorial process. How do you choose a good editor? What kind of editor do you need? What's the difference between the different kinds of editing? And any other topics and suggestions you have around the very broad topic of editorial. So thank you for being with us. Until then, over and out. Bye-bye.